This is a hypothetical scenario based on public doctrine and capabilities. What you are about to hear explores how modern naval power projection, maritime interdiction, and strategic signaling could unfold in a contested environment. None of the specific events described represent actual operations, but the systems, doctrines, and strategic logic are drawn from publicly available sources. Picture a night so dark that the horizon disappears. The kind of darkness that makes sailors question whether their instruments are functioning because their eyes provide nothing at all. Somewhere in the northern Arabian Sea, a cargo vessel cuts through black water at 14 knots. No running lights, no automatic identification system broadcast, just a steel hull carrying something worth $1 billion. And 300 nautical miles to the south, an American destroyer's Combat Information Center glows blue with radar returns and satellite data feeds. The question is not whether they see the ship. The question is what happens when they decide to act. But here's the part most analysts overlook. This interception, if it were to occur, would not be about one ship. It would be about redrawing the rules of great power competition in one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. To understand why this matters, you need to understand the architecture of Iranian supply chains and why Russia would risk moving high-value military cargo through waters dominated by the United States Navy. For over 2 decades, Tehran has relied on a complex web of front companies, flagged vessels, and indirect shipping routes to move weapons, components, and sanctioned goods across international waters. The standard playbook involves transshipment through ports in the United Arab Emirates, Oman, or East Africa, before final delivery to Iranian ports like Bandar Abbas. But something changed in recent years. Public reporting suggests that direct Russia to Iran military cooperation has accelerated dramatically. Satellite imagery analyzed by open-source intelligence communities has documented unusual cargo handling at Russian Black Sea ports. Commercial shipping databases have flagged vessels with irregular patterns, and Western intelligence assessments, according to press reports, indicate growing concern about advanced weapons systems moving between the two nations. Now, this is where the ocean lies to you looking at a map. You might assume the route from Russia to Iran is straightforward. Through the Black Sea, through the Turkish Straits, across the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, down the Red Sea, and into the Gulf of Oman. But every single one of those waypoints represents a choke point where detection is almost guaranteed. The Bosporus alone sees over 40,000 ship transits per year, and every vessel is cataloged. So alternative routes emerge. The Northern Sea route along Russia's Arctic coast, then south through the Pacific, is theoretically possible but logistically complex and still passes through heavily monitored waters. Overland through the Caspian region avoids maritime detection entirely, but limits the size and weight of cargo. Now, some analysts have suggested that rail connections through Central Asia could handle certain types of military equipment, but this creates its own vulnerabilities and delays. The reality is that moving large military hardware by sea requires accepting some level of detection risk. There is simply no invisible path across the world's oceans anymore. And this is precisely where the tension builds. Because detection does not equal interdiction. Knowing where something is and having the capability to stop it are entirely different problems. The United States Navy maintains what strategists call persistent maritime domain awareness across key choke points. This means layered sensor networks combining satellite reconnaissance, maritime patrol aircraft, surface ships, submarines, and signals intelligence collection. The goal is not just to see ships, but to understand their patterns, their cargo declarations versus their actual behavior, and their relationships to known proliferation networks. Think of it like this. A single ship is a data point. Thousands of ships tracked over months become a pattern, and deviations from that pattern raise flags. In the hypothetical scenario we are exploring, imagine that pattern analysis identifies a vessel of interest. Commercial databases show the ship changed ownership 3 times in 18 months. Its transponder went dark for 72 hours near a Russian port. Its current course takes it toward the Strait of Hormuz, but its declared destination is a small port with no capacity to handle its listed cargo weight. But here's the trade-off that most people miss. Seeing something and acting on it are 2 completely different problems. International maritime law creates a complex framework around the right to stop and search vessels on the high seas. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea establishes freedom of navigation as a foundational principle. Warships cannot simply board foreign-flagged vessels without legal justification. The exceptions matter. If a ship is suspected of piracy, slave trading, or certain prohibited activities, boarding authority exists under international law. For weapons proliferation, United Nations Security Council resolutions have authorized interdiction of specific cargoes to specific destinations. The Proliferation Security Initiative, a voluntary framework involving over 100 nations, provides additional mechanisms for cooperative interdiction. The legal question becomes the operational question. What authority applies? What evidence exists? What are the diplomatic consequences of being wrong? Now let us examine the fleet as a system, because a naval interdiction is never one ship against another ship. It is a network against a target. In the scenario we are constructing, the American response might involve assets spread across thousands of miles. A destroyer in the Gulf of Oman provides the closest surface presence, equipped with advanced radar, helicopter capability for close inspection, and a boarding team trained in visit, board, search, and seizure operations. Maritime patrol aircraft like the P-8A Poseidon can cover vast ocean areas using radar sensors to track surface contacts and relay data back to command centers. But the visible assets are only part of the picture. Submarines operating in the region provide covert surveillance capability. Satellite constellations deliver imagery and signals intelligence. Shore-based analysts fuse data from dozens of sources to build a coherent, operational picture. And crucially, allied nations contribute their own sensors and intelligence to the network. The result is what military planners call sensor fusion. No single platform sees everything, but the combined network creates a level of awareness that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. A merchant vessel captain might believe he is sailing through empty ocean, unobserved and unremarked. In reality, his position, course, and speed have been cataloged by satellites overhead. His radio emissions have been collected by signals intelligence platforms. And his hull has been photographed by passing aircraft so many times that analysts can identify new paint or deck modifications. This level of surveillance creates its own strategic effects. Nations attempting covert shipments must assume they are being watched. The question is not whether observation is occurring, but whether it will translate into action. And here's where it gets interesting. The target vessel in our hypothetical scenario is not operating alone either. Russian naval doctrine emphasizes protecting high-value transits with what they call escort groups. This could mean a frigate or corvette sailing in company with the cargo ship, providing air defense and anti-submarine coverage. It could mean pre-positioned submarines along the route, ready to intervene if interdiction is attempted. It could mean electronic warfare aircraft providing jamming coverage at critical moments. Public reporting has documented Russian naval vessels accompanying merchant ships through contested waters on multiple occasions, creating a visible deterrent against interference. The sophistication of modern Russian naval capabilities should not be underestimated. Their newer frigates carry advanced radar systems and anti-ship missiles that pose genuine threats to surface combatants. Their submarines, particularly the newer attack boats, incorporate quieting technologies that make detection difficult, even for advanced Western sonar systems. When Russia commits to protecting a specific transit, they have real capability to back that commitment. The confrontation, if it occurs, is not ship against ship, it is system against system. Networks against networks. Intelligence services against intelligence services. And ultimately, political will against political will. But this is where the kill chain concept becomes essential to understanding how modern naval operations actually function. And I want to be clear here. We are discussing publicly known doctrine at a conceptual level, not operational specifics. The kill chain describes the sequence of steps required to engage a target. Find it. Fix its location. Track its movement. Target it with a weapon system. Engage with that weapon. Assess the result. In interdiction operations, the chain is similar, but the objective is different. The goal is not destruction, but control. Find the vessel. Fix its identity and confirm it matches intelligence. Track its movement to predict where interception can occur. You can position forces to intercept. Engage through boarding or other means. Assess whether the interdiction achieved its objective. Every step in that chain can be disrupted. The target can go dark, disabling tracking systems. It can change course unpredictably. It can enter territorial waters where pursuit becomes diplomatically complicated. It can call for military escort. It can simply stop cooperating with boarding teams, forcing a decision about escalation. And now we reach the decision layer, which is ultimately where these scenarios are won or lost. Imagine you are a commander receiving orders to intercept a vessel suspected of carrying Russian military equipment to Iran. Your intelligence is solid but not certain. The legal authority exists under specific Security Council resolutions, but interpretations vary. The target is now accompanied by a Russian naval vessel that has trained weapon systems in your direction. Your own government is watching in real time through satellite feeds. So is the press. What do you do? This is the fundamental question of escalation control. Modern naval forces possess enormous destructive capability, but that capability is meaningless if political constraints prevent its use. The real calculation is not about firepower, but about consequences. Every naval officer operating in contested water understands that their actions occur within a political context that extends far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Consider the communications architecture alone. That commander is not operating in isolation. Real-time data links connect the ship to fleet headquarters. Satellite feeds provide Washington with the same picture the bridge team is seeing. Senior leadership can monitor the situation as it develops and, if they choose, intervene directly in tactical decisions. The freedom of action that naval commanders once enjoyed, operating independently for weeks or months beyond communication range, no longer exists. This connectivity cuts both ways. It enables better coordination and faster decision-making at higher levels, but it also means that tactical commanders must constantly consider how their actions will appear on screens in distant capitals. The pressure to avoid embarrassment or escalation can conflict with the pressure to accomplish the mission. If you proceed with a boarding and the intelligence is wrong, you have created an international incident over a legitimate cargo. If you proceed and the Russian escort responds with force, you are potentially starting a shooting war between nuclear powers. If you back down, you signal that escort groups can defeat interdiction efforts, encouraging future attempts. There is no clean answer. There is only judgment under pressure. Most conflicts, strategists often say, are decided before the first shot. The decisions that shape outcomes happen in the planning, the positioning, the signaling. By the time ships are facing each other at close range, the options have narrowed dramatically. But here is what the headlines miss. The interdiction we have been discussing might never involve direct confrontation at all. There is an entire category of operations focused on what military planners call left of boom. Actions taken before the crisis point arrives. And consider the intelligence dimension. If Western agencies have penetrated the financial networks funding these shipments, they can freeze assets, sanction front companies, and make the logistics possible before the ship ever sails. If they have cultivated sources inside the supply chain, they might know the cargo manifest before it is loaded. If they have technical access to communication systems, they might understand the timing and routing better than the crew itself. Or consider the diplomatic dimension. A quiet conversation with a flag state might result in a vessel being deregistered, removing its legal protection. Pressure on a transit port might result in the ship being denied services. Coordination with allies might result in the cargo being seized during a routine inspection at a waypoint. The visible military dimension, the destroyers and aircraft and boarding teams, represents one tool among many. And often it is not the tool actually used. Now let me challenge a common assumption. Many observers assume that American naval dominance means automatic victory in any maritime confrontation. But the reality is far more complex. Sea control is not permanent. It is contested, negotiated, and maintained through continuous effort. Russia and Iran have both invested heavily in what strategists call anti-access and area denial capabilities. These are systems designed not to win control of the sea, but to make control costly and uncertain for the dominant power. Fast attack craft carrying anti-ship missiles can swarm larger vessels with overwhelming numbers. Shore-based cruise missiles that can reach hundreds of miles offshore force approaching fleets to operate at greater distances or accept significant risk. Submarines designed for coastal defense lurk in shallow waters where detection is difficult and torpedo range is short. Mines that can close entire waterways require time-consuming clearance operations before safe transit is possible. Iran in particular has developed what some analysts describe as a layered defense concept for the Persian Gulf. The innermost layer consists of small boats and coastal defenses capable of engaging targets at close range. The middle layer involves larger vessels and aircraft carrying anti-ship missiles, with ranges measured in dozens of miles. The outer layer includes ballistic missiles that can theoretically target ships across the entire Gulf region. The effectiveness of these capabilities is debated among military analysts. American countermeasures, including missile defense systems and electronic warfare capabilities, might neutralize significant portions of the threat. But the uncertainty itself matters. No commander wants to be the first to test whether those defensive systems work as advertised against a saturation attack. In the confined waters of the Persian Gulf, these capabilities create what analysts describe as a contested zone. American carriers might dominate the open ocean, but operating close to Iranian shores involves accepting significant risk. So the interdiction scenario we have been exploring might unfold very differently depending on geography. In the open Arabian Sea, American surface ships operate with relative freedom, where helicopter ranges are sufficient for distant inspections. Air cover from land bases or carriers provides protection. The target vessel has few options except compliance or flight. But as the vessel approaches the Strait of Hormuz, the calculus shifts. Iranian coastal defenses come into range. The waterway narrows, limiting maneuver space. Neutral shipping crowds the transit lanes, complicating any use of force. And every mile closer to Iranian territorial waters strengthens Tehran's legal and practical position. This is the geography of escalation. Distance creates options. Proximity creates constraints. Let me now present 3 scenarios for how this hypothetical situation might resolve, understanding that reality is always more complex than any model. In the first scenario, the interdiction succeeds through signaling rather than force. American forces position visibly along the vessel's route, making clear that passage will be contested. Russian military escort moves to accompany the ship, but the visible American presence raises the stakes. Through diplomatic back channels, a negotiation occurs. Perhaps the cargo is rerouted through overland means. Perhaps a face-saving compromise is reached, where the vessel submits to inspection and is found to be carrying only permitted items. The immediate crisis resolves, but the underlying competition continues. In the second scenario, information advantage proves decisive. Western intelligence has mapped the entire network supporting this shipment, from the financing to the logistics to the personnel involved. Rather than confront the vessel at sea, a coordinated operation targets the network simultaneously. Bank accounts are frozen. Key facilitators are sanctioned or arrested in third countries. The shipping company loses its insurance. The cargo sits in port because no one will touch it. The vessel never sails, and the public never learns how close a confrontation came. In the third scenario, logistics and geography become the silent winners. The shipment is simply too large and too specialized to move by any alternative means. But the sea route is now so heavily monitored that covert transit is impossible. Russia and Iran face a choice between open defiance, which risks military confrontation, and abandonment of the transfer, which represents strategic defeat. They choose a middle path, breaking the shipment into smaller components moved through multiple channels over many months. The immediate billion-dollar transfer is prevented, but the underlying relationship continues to develop through less visible means. Each of these scenarios reflects a different understanding of what victory means in modern naval competition. The first emphasizes credible deterrence and diplomatic off-ramps. The second demonstrates that military force is only one instrument of national power and often not the decisive one. The third acknowledges that strategic competition is a marathon, not a sprint, and that preventing single dramatic shipments matters less than shaping long-term patterns. Which approach is most likely to succeed depends on variables that cannot be known from open sources. How good is Western intelligence penetration of these networks? How willing are Russia and Iran to accept risk for strategic gain? How united are American allies in supporting aggressive interdiction policies? How might China, observing from the sidelines, adjust its own calculations based on the outcome? And this brings us to the fundamental insight that makes naval power so significant in the 21st century. Control of the sea is not about ships fighting ships, although that capability remains essential. Control is about the ability to use the ocean when you need to, while denying that use to adversaries. It is about commerce flowing freely or being choked off. It is about allies being supplied or isolated. It is about options existing or disappearing. The hypothetical scenario we have explored today illustrates how modern naval operations combine visible force with invisible networks, legal frameworks with raw power, political constraints with military capability. The billion-dollar shipment matters not because of what it contains, but because of what its passage or prevention signals about the rules of the international order. In your opinion, after examining this scenario, which factor matters most in modern maritime competition? Is it the sensors that find targets? Is it the logistics that sustain operations? Is it the political signaling that shapes decisions before forces ever meet? The ocean keeps its own counsel, and the competition continues far from public view. This video is for educational purposes only, based on public information. It is not operational advice and should not be used to plan harm or wrongdoing.